A very good morning, everyone. Minister of State, Ms. Gan Seo Wang, distinguished speakers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mraganika Singh Tamar, and I have the pleasure of being the MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the second India-Singapore Futures Forum. To commence the proceedings, I would like to invite Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director of Institute of South Asian Studies at National University of Singapore, on stage to deliver the welcome remarks. Dr. Sevia, please.
Minister Gan Seo Wang, Minister of State for Trade and Industry and Foreign Affairs, Excellency Dr. Shilpa Kambule, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, Professor Tan Tai Yong, Chairman of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore and President of the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the second India-Singapore Futures Forum. And I'm particularly thankful that all of you have braved the rain, and I'm also very impressed that most of you have got here on time. Last year marked the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between India and Singapore. Over the 6 decades, the partnership has been grounded in shared values, mutual trust, and common aspirations. ISES launched the India-Singapore Futures Forum last year to not just reflect upon the growth trajectory of the relationship, but also to reflect upon the growth and the directions in which this bilateral relationship can grow in the future decades to come. This forum was essentially envisaged as a site at which we can catalyze new ideas about cooperation between India and Singapore in new domains. You'll notice I'm using the term new a lot here, and I'll come back to explain that in a second. And also, it was increasingly important for us to reflect upon this relationship, this bilateral relationship between India and Singapore, in the context of the evolving global order. Now, it's no secret that the global order is in flux. While we know that multilateral institutions, international systems, also trade mechanisms that we've been used to are being questioned, we're not sure about the direction in which the world is actually heading. What is clear to us, though, is that countries need to cement relationships, to broaden engagement with other countries, and to deepen sectors of current engagement. And this is why when we meet today, we need to reflect upon India-Singapore relations in this evolving global order and directions in which we can take the relationship. The energy and climate landscape is being reshaped by geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions, and technological shifts. Ongoing developments in the Middle East underscore how quickly geopolitical shifts can affect energy security and economic stability, particularly for globally connected economies like India and Singapore. Concerns over energy security underscore the fact that the green transition, which we are talking about a lot today, is not only a climate imperative, but also a strategic necessity. While the global order, the direction in which the global order is evolving is unclear, it is clear, as I said earlier, that countries need to cooperate with each other. And in this evolving global order, Singapore and India are keen to strengthen their existing links and explore new forms of cooperation. The third India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable in August 2025 reaffirmed collaboration across several pillars, with sustainability at the forefront. Both countries have committed to advancing work on green hydrogen and ammonia, while strengthening engagement to initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance and the Global Biofuels Alliance. Progress is also underway on an India-Singapore green and digital shipping corridor. Today's discussions build on these foundations. In the morning, we will have a plenary session in which we explore how India and Singapore are negotiating the shifting global order and how they can deepen and broaden their relations. The discussions that follow will focus on 3 key areas: clean energy systems, green shipping and maritime decarbonization, and sustainable digital infrastructure. In an increasingly uncertain and fragmented global economy, both countries share an interest in resilient supply chains and open, stable economic networks. And the scope for partnership is considerable. Singapore's strengths in finance, connectivity, and innovation complement India's scale and capacity to deploy solutions. Together, there is strong potential to deepen cooperation in clean fuels, low-carbon logistics, carbon markets, digital energy systems, and sustainable industry. And I would venture to say that in the process of this bilateral engagement, both India and Singapore can help shape sustainable pathways for the region. I thank you all for joining us today, and I would like to especially thank our guest of honor for accepting our invitation to join us in this session. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for joining us this morning, and I look forward, like all of you, to a productive engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sivya. Next, I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Shilpak Ambale, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, to deliver the opening remarks. Your Excellency, please.
Very good morning to all of you. Honorable Minister Madam Gan Xiao Huang, Professor Tan Tai Yong, Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, panelists, my friends from the Singapore Society, Mr. Gautam Banerjee, Mr. Satpal Khattar, everybody else present today. I'm very happy that the forum today sees so many people present, and I'm delighted to be here today to speak at the second edition of the India-Singapore Futures Forum. The initiative was started last year, which marked the 60th anniversary of establishment of our diplomatic ties. It is heartening to see that the idea has continued into the second year, and I would like to specially thank Professor Sevia and his ISAS team for their support for the India-Singapore Futures Forum. I hope that this will become an annual feature, and our High Commission will be happy to work with ISAS for its future editions. The topic of this public session is India-Singapore cooperation in a fragmenting global economy. A lot is being said these days, and more will be said about the fragmentation of the global economy. Let me limit myself to the India-Singapore part of the topic, how both countries are continuing on the path of forging a broader and a deeper partnership. Befitting to the importance of both India and Singapore that are attached to each other, last 1 year witnessed several important exchanges and ever-growing cooperation in various areas. We had the privilege of hosting President Thurman in January of 2025 and Prime Minister Lawrence Wong in September of 2025, becoming the only country which had the honor of hosting both these dignitaries in the same year. These visits built on the foundations laid by Prime Minister Modi's visit to Singapore in September of 2024. We also had the privilege of hosting 6 Singaporean ministers, led by DPM Gan Kim Yong, for the 3rd India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable in August last year in India. It's a very unique mechanism where 10 ministers come under one roof, and we've successfully held that for 3 consecutive years, and our attempt is to hold one later this year, so that it gives you a continuity in this relationship. We also had the visits of several cabinet ministers and chief ministers from India to Singapore, last one being that of Chief Minister Yogi from Uttar Pradesh. We also hosted several Singaporean ministers in India, the last one being Minister Josephine Teo for the India AI Impact Summit in February this year. Our guest of honor today, Madam Gan Xiao Huang, has visited India twice last year. She accompanied Prime Minister Wong for the India visit. She later accompanied Minister Shanmugam for the CII Partnership Summit in Andhra Pradesh. I must mention that this hectic pace of engagement brings a mix of admiration and envy from my fellow colleagues in Singapore. What have we achieved during all these visits? We agreed to a roadmap for a comprehensive strategic partnership. The roadmap identified 8 pillars to forge the future path of our partnership. There are, of course, traditional areas of economic collaboration, defense, and people-to-people exchanges and cultural collaboration. There are areas which build on our complementarities like skill development and connectivity. And of course, there are future-oriented areas of digitalization, healthcare, medicine, and sustainability. Both sides are keen to work together in the area of semiconductors, AI, nuclear energy, and space. We had a delegation from InSpace early this year, where they brought in few startups from India, and we had a good session where we had the startups from India and the investors from Singapore under one roof. In the last 1 year, I am happy to say that the considerable progress has been made on several fronts in the CSP roadmap. Allow me to share some glimpses. I will begin with two examples involving our guest of honor today. First, last Monday, Minister Gan Xiao Huang co-chaired the meeting of the Singapore-Andhra Pradesh Joint Implementation Steering Committee in Singapore with Minister Nara Lokesh from Andhra Pradesh. Both sides are working on accelerating the development of Amravati Economic Region in Andhra Pradesh. In the last 2 years, Chief Ministers of Gujarat, Odisha, Assam, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and UP have visited Singapore to strengthen economic ties with this country. These exchanges signify how Indian states have become important stakeholders in the bilateral relationship. Second, when Minister Gan visited India last November, she inaugurated India Office of Singapore Business Federation in Bengaluru. This is SBF's first office in India, signifying growing interest among Singaporean companies to develop ties with India. I will also highlight some very recent examples of how diverse our collaboration has become. We had the 5th meeting of the JWG on counter-terrorism and transnational crime on 7th May in Delhi. Both sides reiterated their commitment to work closer on the challenges of terrorism and transnational crime. We sincerely appreciate Singapore's support in our fight against cross-border terrorism. Last week, Singapore's Sovereign Wealth Fund, GIC, announced a fresh round of investment in India's startup space, Skyroot. This round of funding raised Skyroot's valuation to around 1.1 billion, making it the first Indian space sector unicorn. Such investments signal the high level of comfort that Singaporean investors have with India and the potential that they see in India's growth story. Singapore has been hosting several Indian naval ships over the years. The recent one was INS Sunaina in April last week. This ship was visiting Singapore under the aegis of IOS Sagar mission with a multinational crew of 16 Indian Ocean countries, including Singapore. Singapore also participated in the Indian Ocean Conference held in Mauritius and the Indian Ocean Dialogue held in Delhi. These initiatives are a testament of India's vision for a collaborative future for the Indian Ocean region, and we are glad to have a partner like Singapore. A high-level Indian government and business delegation participated in the Singapore Maritime Week 2026. There was a ministerial delegation last year which participated in the Maritime Week, and we are happy that this kind of collaboration in the maritime sector is continuing to thrive. Both sides, as Professor Sevia mentioned, are working on implementing the agreement on establishing a green and digital shipping corridor between the two countries. In the last 1 year, we have worked with Singapore in all possible areas under the CSP roadmap, be it AI, semiconductors, skilling, investments, defense, maritime connectivity, and so on. Our endeavor this year is to maintain this momentum, keep the dialogue going, and make progress on various ongoing initiatives. I feel that the India-Singapore Futures Forum is an important platform for contributing to this ongoing dialogue, involving both public and private sector stakeholders from both sides. Its theme, and particularly the topics for the closed-door workshops, are very relevant for our bilateral collaboration. We look forward to the insights and practical suggestions emanating from today's discussion. India and Singapore are important partners for each other. In an interview with the Hindustan Times, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong had said, "Our confidence in India is not new. It is not a recent thing. It is long-standing and it is backed by proven track record and actions." He further said that Singapore will continue to invest in India and Singapore will continue to have confidence in India's prospects for the future. Prime Minister Modi reciprocated these warm sentiments while addressing the media after his meeting with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong in Delhi last year. PM said, "Our relations go far beyond diplomacy. This is a partnership with purpose, rooted in shared values, guided by mutual interests, and driven by a common vision for peace, prosperity, and progress." We strive to work with our Singaporean partners to maintain this faith and realize the potential of India-Singapore partnership. I would like to convey my best wishes to ISAS and participating scholars for a fruitful exchange of ideas. I thank ISAS for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you and wish you a very productive and fruitful session.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are pleased to have Minister of State Ms. Kang Seow Wang as our guest of honor this morning. Before I invite her on stage to deliver her keynote address, I would like to bring back Dr. Sivia to introduce our esteemed guest of honor. Dr. Sivia, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, it is my honor to thank our guest of honor and to welcome her to the forum that we will be hosting. I thank her for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote address for the second India-Singapore Futures Forum and for taking time from a busy schedule. At a time of growing geopolitical uncertainty, energy security concerns, and accelerating climate challenges, this year's forum is particularly timely. As both countries deepen cooperation in areas such as sustainable development, critical technologies, and resilient supply chains, our keynote speaker is particularly well placed to provide perspectives from Singapore, but also from our engagements with India. Minister Gunn is the Minister of State for Trade and Industry and Foreign Affairs. In her role, she is closely involved in strengthening Singapore's international partnerships, engagements with India, economic resilience, and sustainable development agenda, issues that are central to today's discussions. She has been the Member of Parliament for Marymount single-member constituency since 2020. Prior to her current role, Minister Gunn championed the Skills Future movement and advocated for workplace diversity, flexible work arrangements, and mental well-being support as part of the work of the Ministry of Manpower and Ministry of Education. Minister Gunn served in the Republic of Singapore Air Force for more than 25 years, and she was the first female Brigadier General and Chief of Staff, Air Staff in the Singapore Armed Forces. Mr. Gunn holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a Master's in Business Administration from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Again, I would like to thank our guest of honor for gracing this forum and welcome her to deliver the keynote address. Mr. Gunn, please.
His Excellency Dr. Shilpak, your second time I'm meeting you this week. You've been working very hard. Professor Tan Tai Yong, Chairman of ISAS and President of SUSS, Associate Professor Iqbal, Director of ISAS, distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, friends, some of whom are from Marymount. Good morning. Very nice to see that despite the disruptions, and what's happening around us in this world, we continue to press on with a forum like this. A forum that helps us to shape the future of this region and also of the world. It's remarkable that we continue to stay the course, to look at what are the long-term challenges that we need to address and not be distracted by the disruptions that are happening around us. So I thank you. Thank you for making the time and participating in today's forum. Let me begin by thanking ISAS for bringing together policymakers, researchers, industry leaders from both Singapore and India to discuss issues that matter to us. Now, I also want to thank His Excellency High Commissioner for his very warm remarks, reminding us that there's a lot of work that has been going on between Singapore and India, and there's a lot more that we can do together. Today's theme, Accelerating Green Transitions, India-Singapore Cooperation in a Fragmenting World Economy, could not be more timely. Around the world, governments are grappling with the same fundamental challenge of how to accelerate transition towards low-carbon energy systems while balancing sustainability energy security and affordability, what we call the trilemma. And trilemma is so real for Singapore. Now, achieving this will require innovation, investment, and international cooperation. Let me start with innovation. As a small island state with very limited domestic energy resources, Singapore imports nearly all of our energy today. Our power and industry sectors account for about 80% of our emissions. Now we have, as a small country, committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, while ensuring that our energy systems remains reliable, sustainable, and affordable. Now, to achieve this, we take a four switches approach, basically a diversified set of pathways to support Singapore's energy transition. This may remind you of our four national taps, in the context of water. Similarly, for energy, we are embarking on this strategy of four switches. What are these four switches? Firstly, we still maintain natural gas as a transitional fuel, which generates about 95% of Singapore's electricity. Natural gas will be here to stay for a long time. And of course, besides natural gas, we are also looking at our own domestic solar deployment. We have recently raised our national goal of solar from 2 gigawatt peak to 3 gigawatt peak by 2030. And solar, by the way, is still our most viable domestic renewable energy source. Now, third, we are exploring low-carbon technology imports from our neighbors. This is also to diversify our energy mix. It is a promising path. In fact, we have already started to issue conditional licenses and approvals to several countries and companies in our region. Now, lastly, we are investing in low-carbon alternatives such as hydrogen and its derivatives, including ammonia. And of course, we are studying the possibility of civil nuclear energy, in particular, small modular reactors. No single pathway will get us to net zero, which is why we have to look at a portfolio for us to be able to achieve affordable, sustainable, and the energy security that we need for the future. To support this, the government has launched an $800 million decarbonization grand challenge. And this includes new programs to support translational research, development, demonstration activities, and very importantly, to catalyze private investments in promising but also nascent type of technologies. Partnerships are also equally important in advancing innovation. For instance, in December last year, NTU partnered with the government of Odisha and IIT at Bhubaneswar to launch a 5-year, $10 million collaboration to pilot and also to test sustainable energy technologies. Now, secondly, besides innovation, the second approach that we require is investment, and that means scaling the transition while balancing sustainability, energy security, and affordability. Singapore and India have a strong and multifaceted economic partnership that's anchored by strong bilateral trade and investment links. Dr. Shipak mentioned this earlier on. Now, Singapore has been India's largest investor for many years, accounting for nearly a quarter of India's cumulative foreign direct investment inflows. This reflects India's rapid growth and also the many investment opportunities that this growth has created. Now, this actually relationship runs both ways. We also see that Singapore has been consistently among the top destinations for India's overseas investments. Our governments have also established partnerships to support economic cooperation. The ISMR, India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable, which was mentioned earlier on, this type of platform allows high-level ministerial discussion on developments in areas that we believe will help us to strengthen the trade and investment between both countries. And these are in the areas of digitalization, sustainability, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, medicine, skills development, and connectivity. India is one of the fastest growing major economies, while Singapore serves as a trusted global hub connecting companies, capital, talent, and ideas. India and Singapore possess complementary strengths, and together we are well positioned to do more in these areas. The third area is in international cooperation. We need international cooperation to accelerate the transition towards low-carbon energy systems. Now, no country can successfully tackle climate change or navigate the energy transition alone. Partnerships enable us to share expertise, develop common standards, and also to scale solutions that would be difficult to achieve in isolation. Now, one good example is the Singapore-India Green and Digital Shipping Corridor. The signing was witnessed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Lawrence Wong during Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's visit to India in September last year. And under this initiative, Singapore and India will work with industry partners to support the maritime sector's transition to zero or near zero emission fuels while strengthening digitalization across supply chains. Singapore and India are also cooperating under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement to support emissions reduction projects and facilitate the development of high-quality carbon credits. Beyond government cooperation, businesses and research institutions, many of whom are here today from both Singapore and India, are increasingly engaging one another on sustainability and climate innovation. Singaporean companies such as Sembcorp Industries are supporting India's decarbonization efforts through renewable energy investments across 13 Indian states with a renewable portfolio of about 7.6 gigawatt. The energy transition is not only a technological challenge, but also an economic one that we are all faced with. Platforms like today's forum actually matter because solutions usually do not come from single sector alone. The government, certainly not by ourselves, the industry not by themselves, and academics and researchers can't do this on their own. So we have to come together, and I'm thankful to ISES for organizing today's forum. I hope that today's session will spark new ideas, new energy, and new solutions that will shape the future of the world. Thank you.
We will now commence the panel discussion on India-Singapore in the fragmenting global economy. I would like to introduce the distinguished speakers on stage. Professor Tan Tai Yong, President, Singapore University of Social Sciences and Chairman of ISES NUS. Mr. Ashok Malik, Partner and Chair of India Practice, the Asia Group India. And Ms. Sonal Verma, Managing Director and Chief Economist, Nomura Singapore. Moderating the session is Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director, ISES NUS. I will now hand the session to Dr. Sevia. Thank you.
Thank you, Meganika. Welcome again. I hope you're suitably refreshed from the tea break and warmed up from the rain outside. I will be a very good moderator, which means that I will say as little as possible and let the speakers actually who are here to share their thoughts. And a number of things have come up. We have broad things to discuss. The world is an incredibly complex environment. And we have new challenges that we need to confront in an evolving global context. So there are multiple questions, complexities, debates that we can have and engage with. But to start, I think it'll be a good point to start with sort of taking stock of the India-Singapore relations. I noted earlier in my comments that last year marked the 60th anniversary of relations between India and Singapore. And we actually set up the forum in that context. So perhaps a good way to start would be to to think about how we should characterize the relationship between India and Singapore, how has it grown, which sectors have been particularly important, but also what has facilitated the growth of this. And I think the best person to start with, to ask that question to will be Prof. Tan, because Prof. Tan has observed the relationship, he's studied it, but he's also been part of the process of building this relationship as well, not least through his chairmanship of ISES, but his long-term engagement with ISES. So Prof. Tan, how would you characterize the relationship?
Hello, thank you, Iqbal. Good morning, everyone. This morning, as Minister was listening to the opening remarks, she turned to me and asked me, he said, how long has ISES been around? I said, we celebrated our 20th anniversary a year ago, right? So we've been around for 20 years, and way back then, I think it was 2005 or something like that, ISES was set up to address this growing interest in India from Singapore's perspective, to try to understand India and South Asia more broadly. And as Iqbal suggested, it has been a kind of a long process, although I would say that this relationship predated the 20 years. So India-Singapore relationship actually has evolved over a long period of time, and it would be remiss of me as a historian not to sort of inject some history into this. So there were deep historical roots and colonial era links that have strengthened this relationship, or they have been the foundation of this relationship between India and Singapore. There was a period of a political distance during the Cold War, but then strategic and economic interests converge again after the 1990s with India's economic reforms and its Look East policy. And this has also led to India's deeper engagement with Southeast Asia through Singapore. Now, Singapore served as an important bridge between India and ASEAN, and it encouraged India's deeper integration into the regional as well as the economic frameworks and connecting India more closely to East Asia and Southeast Asia. There were certain milestones in the relationship that has grown over the years, and one of the most significant was in 2005 when Singapore and India signed the CECA, Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, and that agreement became the foundation upon which cooperation was expanded to include trade, investment, services, technology, education, and of course the movement of talent. Now, it was not just in trade and investment that this relationship was built on, although they were the key pillars, but also it started to expand into areas like defense, maritime security, fintech, digital economy, education, skills development, and of course, very deep people-to-people exchanges. So from 2005, when we signed the CECA, 10 years later, there was a strategic partnership that was developed between India and Singapore that further institutionalized this very broad cooperation framework. This has now deepened in many ways, and we have forums such as the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable, the ISMR, and also the India-Singapore Business Roundtable, and this has facilitated continuous engagement and dialogues between governments, G2G, B2B, and also to facilitate ideas about new opportunities and what are new and interesting avenues that could be grown to expand this relationship. So beyond trade and investment, and I think these have been strong, new areas have been identified. I mentioned digital economy, and Minister said it as well, fintech, green energy, sustainability, semiconductor manufacturing, skills development, innovation, ecosystems, and so on. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of commitment on the side of Singapore and India to build this relationship, and you heard this morning from the two speeches about the level of activity that is happening now at the highest level between ministers, prime ministers, and so on, and then at the working levels as well, where there are lots of interest in developing mechanisms and fora for exchange of ideas. And this is now expanded. The ecosystem is expanded because in areas where you need science and technology, we are now bringing in, we are now seeing deeper engagement between research institutes, universities, think tanks to engage counterparts in India. So it was mentioned this morning that NTU, for instance, has a collaboration with IIT in Odisha to develop green technology, green production, sustainable technologies, skill development, and workforce mobility. So research, educational partnerships have deepened these ties between Singapore and India, and I think this will, in a way, thicken the kind of relationship. So now, coming from history, the question is now looking forward. So how to future-proof this relationship, for instance, by looking at new areas, new emerging areas where there are shared interests, complementarities of strengths, and also capacities. And this is where the ministerial roundtable, the business roundtable, private sector engagement are reaffirming of the kinds of commitments for us to be looking at new areas to grow. So it's been a long journey, but it is a journey that is still happening, and I think the possibilities for the future are immense, the potential are immense, and as the Minister said this morning, and also the High Commissioner, I think we are now looking at new areas where we believe that both Singapore and India and our shared interests can take us onto this next phase of our journey. So perhaps I'll end here and then let others have a say.
Sure. I should add, I don't have a fixed batting order, so I'm just going to what comes to mind, and wherever the conversation ends off, I'll go that way. But Prathan, you ended on that note about looking ahead, and as we look ahead, we need to actually grapple with the sort of fragmenting global economy, geopolitical structures, but also what economic competition means as we scan ahead. And it was someone many decades ago famously said there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So picking up from that, can I ask you another broad question, Ashok? I'll pick up with you on that as well. And I'm like to frame this a bit broader than just India, Singapore, but invite you to speak about what shape will economic competitiveness in Asia take, and what can we expect looking ahead?
Yeah, a very interesting question, and I think maybe it's important to sort of look back at what economic competition looked like in the past. And over the last, 50 to 70 years, competition for a lot of Asian economies has actually meant being lower cost and producing, products at higher quality, moving up the value chain over a period of time. What we have seen in the last 6-7 years now is that the pattern of trade and investment alignment that we are seeing now is less on the basis of the cheapest cost and sort of more on the basis of geopolitical alignments. So I think whether a country is a trusted partner and sort of strategically aligned in certain blocks becomes an important driver of who benefits from the ongoing trade and supply chain realignment and what kind of investment capital that a country actually attracts. So that's a big change from what we have seen in the past. In addition, I think, we are entering a new world where the importance of the sectors that are sort of going to drive future growth are very, very different, right? So there's increased focus now, of course, on this technology race, who moves ahead on AI, energy security, which has basically been reawakened with what's happening with the Middle East conflict, the push towards more defense spending that a lot of countries, access to critical minerals, which has become very important. So I think access is a very important second pillar of what defines competitiveness. So your access to energy becomes an important input into whether, as a country, you can be competitive and drive the future sectors that are really needed in terms of growth. Similarly, I think within a country, flexibility is going to be extremely important. So you need flexibility in the labor markets in order to reskill and shift workers into the new sectors that are coming through. Reskilling, as we know, is going to be extremely important with the potential disruption from AI. Similarly, the ability of a country to flexibly shift capital into the emerging sectors, and so access to capital also becomes an important driver of who's going to be competitive in the future. So yeah, I think it's a complete revamp of what drives competitiveness compared to what we've been used to in the old model.
Actually, that leads very nicely to a question, Ashok, I was hoping to pitch to you actually. How does this fragmenting global economy play out for India? How does India see this as an opportunity, a threat, a challenge to be negotiated?
Thank you. First, I must begin by thanking NUS and ISIS for inviting me once again. It's always a pleasure to be here in front of this audience and in Singapore. And I'm glad to be having this conversation. Let me begin by, pointing to the decade we are in. Every year since 2020, since the pandemic hit us in February 2020, I've told myself this is a year from hell. And every year I have to revise my assessment of what hell is. I would argue that we've had so many shocks in this decade. We've had the pandemic, we've had the breakdown or the severe stress test that the globalization model has been put to. I don't think it's broken down completely, but it's been put to severe challenges. We've had the Ukraine crisis, we've had the conflict following the October 7th incident in terror attack in Israel. We've had the US-China breakdown. And now, of course, we have the war in the Persian Gulf. I would argue that the impact of this war on the economy, on all our economies, on economies from Australia to the gates of Europe, across Asia, including Singapore and India, is probably going to be the deepest and longest felt. COVID, for instance, interrupted consumption. It bottled it up till it opened up again once people went back to work and to their lives. Here we are actually contemplating demand destruction. Okay? So this has added to severe challenges that were already existed. Are there opportunities here? Yes, they are. There are always opportunities. But the realization of some of those opportunities will be decidedly postponed. Let's admit it. Some of the numbers all of us were looking at, whether for the Indian growth or whether for growth in this part of the world, we'll see deadlines moving. However, this is not to say that it is all bleak. Immediately, this year is a challenge. Maybe the next year is also a challenge. But in a slightly longer term frame, countries such as Singapore and India are part of each other's resilience and diversification strategy. We are both looking for options to sourcing concentration from one great power, which is a great power we all need to work with, but there is a concentration risk there, and to a market concentration from another great power, which is increasingly a very unpredictable power. Now, again, maybe Singapore depends more on exports to the US than India does, but in the sectors where India exports to the US tariffs have been an existential crisis. So we both face similar challenges, and many countries in Asia do. How does India see this moment? Quite honestly, the medium-term thinking in India, which is to build an industrial and manufacturing sector in key areas, in key industries, not across the board because that's not possible anyway, to simply give itself more resilience, leverage, and domestic capabilities, also leverage in the international economy. That pathway remains where it was. And despite the challenges of the past 4 or 5 years, both in terms of macroeconomic stability in India and management in India, and determined focus on those manufacturing areas, the government and the economic system have remained steadfast. Which are those areas? I would argue they are broadly electronics and semiconductors, defense, green manufacture. In all of these areas, cooperation with countries such as Singapore, both in terms of investment, which can obviously provide great returns, but also in terms of industrial cooperation and technology sharing. If you look at semiconductors, for instance, India, if the semiconductor ecosystem is a skyscraper, India is at echelon 4 or 5, maybe 6. 2 years ago, we were at groundbreaking, but we've certainly made some progress. The next stage beyond, we have one fab which should be ready by the end of this year, which is a Tata PSMC collaboration. We also have a Micron assembly and testing facility which is working and functional. But the next stage really is a deepening of the long horizon semiconductor project in India with materials and equipment. And we simply cannot do that without cooperation from countries such as Singapore, and that was mentioned by both the Minister and the High Commissioner this morning. Second, India's approach to trade, especially trade agreements, has gone through a shift. It has gone through multiple shifts, to be honest with you. Not all of those shifts have been entirely logical and explicable, but it has gone through multiple shifts over the past few years. I do believe from a wide-eyed view, an over-optimistic and idealistic view of the benefits of large trade agreements and of free trade more generally at the beginning of the century, there is a more calibrated approach now. And from what we used to call free trade agreements, we are now signing feasible trade agreements. And every feasible trade agreement has its own feasibility metric and test. We've signed or renewed trade agreements with a number of countries, largely to our west, countries or blocs, the EU, the UK, the Canada agreement should come soon. The US agreement will come when a certain gentleman in the White House agrees to sign it, but it's more or less done. There's a CEPA with Australia, which there's a free trade agreement with even New Zealand. The logical next step is to look to our east, have a renewed look to our east and revive what frankly has been a shaky economic trade relationship with ASEAN, including Singapore, in the past few years. There have been misgivings on both sides. I'm not blaming one side alone, but it's logical, especially in this new global environment, for India and ASEAN to take a deep look at what is feasible, what is not feasible, and work together. And Singapore, as a bridge between India and ASEAN, plays a very important role there. Because for those in the Indian system, and including senior government people who are still invested in a very global Indian economy, a globalized, internationalized Indian economy, the logical next step of all these trade agreements which we've signed with a number of countries is a deep look at CPTPP. That is the logical next step. That is the next leap. It will not be easy. It's not an easy sell at home at all. I'm not even sure people are seriously working on it yet, but that is the long horizon goal. And that is where the India-Singapore partnership frankly becomes crucial.
Actually, Ashok, if I may stick with you for a second there, you mentioned the long horizon view with regards to India, Singapore, but also India, ASEAN, and there's a lot of interest in this room about the India, ASEAN. So I'm going to just draw you out a little more. You mentioned that there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen about what's feasible and what's not feasible, and you mentioned the long horizon view. Could I ask you, in your perspective, what do you think is feasible and what is... Yes. Yeah.
We are living in a world where feasibility in a trade deal is increasingly implicated by domestic politics and constituencies. Okay, it's not an ideal world, but it's a reality. This is true for the US, this is true for India, this is true for, I imagine, Japan. Try exporting rice to Japan, it's not easy, never has been. And frankly, foreign policy managers and trade negotiators in all of our countries simply don't have the autonomy and agency that they had, let's say, in 1999 or 2001. That is a reality. We have to live with that. The free trade agreements with individual ASEAN countries and then the embrace of ASEAN as a whole was India's first with a fairly closed India's first leap into a new trade architecture at the beginning of the century. I believe we went into it with some idealism, as I said, and a lot of hope, and also without doing our domestic homework. There was this belief that as opportunities arose, domestic capacities and systems would automatically reorganize themselves to take advantage of those opportunities. That is not how the real world works. You need genuine factor market reforms and an enabling environment, maybe even industrial policy to some degree, okay? Which was a bad word in 2001. Today it's a new normal. None of that happened, and we ended up actually becoming vulnerable to imports, even in areas where we had some manufacturing capacities. And this led to a pushback. Again, I'm not blaming exporting countries. They found a market opportunity, they went ahead, but this is a reality. And by the time Mr. Modi's government came to office in 2014, which was when the review of many of these trade agreements was taking place, he and his party felt the pushback, and they paused on a lot of trade initiatives. Now, what typically happens in a bureaucracy anywhere in the world, Singapore has escaped it, but we haven't, is that what is supposed to be a temporary pause and recalibration then acquires a momentum of its own. So what was supposed to be a recalibration of and focused renegotiation of certain limited trade parameters ended up becoming something much deeper and longer. And the idea of a more open and more accessible India, especially from the trade and market access perspective, only came back to life, frankly, after the COVID pandemic in 2020, which is when we've started to see a shift. In a sense, ASEAN was our first frontier, and now the relook at ASEAN is our final frontier. It has to happen. There's no way, we can't trade with everybody else and not be trading, not be ambitious about trade with ASEAN. But there are concerns. One, the interlocking of individual ASEAN country economies with China, for instance, uniform. Okay? So different countries pose different challenges. Second, please remember, I'll give this example to the High Commissioner of New Zealand in India a few months ago. I said, please remember, when it comes to market access and opening up consumer markets, a developed country like New Zealand has a semiconductor problem, but not what I called a saucepan problem. What do I mean by that? For critical technologies, you want domestic resilience or trusted partner resilience, to borrow from the word Sonal used, and you have concerns. But for cheap consumer goods, like say saucepans or frying pans, New Zealand doesn't want to make them at home. The country of 5 million people, each saucepan will cost $100. Okay, so you have no problem keeping that open to imports from other countries, from whether it's ASEAN, whether it's China or wherever. In the case of India, if we open up our market to saucepans and frying pans, I'm using that as an example, I don't mean saucepans in particular, you are destroying domestic manufacture, which might produce saucepans that are as good, it might produce saucepans that are not as good. I appreciate that. But there is a hollowing out of domestic manufacturing facilities and communities and the economy. And that becomes a challenge for any government. This was not something we were discussing in 2001, but today it is a reality.
If I can just
I
add
was gonna come
to
to you.
what Ashok mentioned, I think looking at it from India's perspective, most of the FTAs India has signed, I mean, essentially India is trying to diversify and find new consumer markets. So whether it's US and EU as a bloc is sizable as an end consumer market for final products. Similarly, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and so on. So I think in terms of a win-win partnership, would require opening up the final end demand market in these countries as well. And second, as Ashok mentioned, I think the big concern has been the flow of goods coming via ASEAN countries into India. And therefore, a stricter implementation of rules of origin to ensure that there is no tariff hopping that is underway. I think that becomes an important ingredient. So opening up the consumer market, I think for some ASEAN economies which are sort of more commodity oriented, this is clearly an opportunity between India and, let's say Indonesia and Malaysia. And the third component would be sort of implementation of rules of origin. Of course, India is trying to be a part of the global value chain, so there will be some import of intermediate products, but it should not be as a result of tariff hopping.
Actually, Shun, I'm glad you took the mic, because I was going to push that question to you as well. And to follow up on your comments, actually, we've established, we know that that geopolitics is increasingly shaping trade and investment flows. But as both of you have alluded to in your comments, the other issue that countries like India have to grapple with is the sort of supply chain diversification, industrial policy competition, but also the sort of wider geoeconomic tensions that determine investment flows. How should India position itself in this regard?
I think, like from India's perspective, it's maybe a three-pillar strategy that India, I would say, is following / needs to follow. First is becoming an important node in the global value chain is an opportunity from this global fragmentation from India's perspective. And what India has to offer is essentially it's a neutral party, it's unaligned. And therefore, for countries / companies that are looking for an alternate supply chain node, particularly in the more strategic sectors, India offers, that opportunity. So, one is, yes, India is trying to also become a part of the global value chain in low value add manufacturing products like, smartphone assembly, where we have seen a lot of success, which we are now trying to replicate in some of the other low value add manufacturing sectors like, toys and furniture and stuff. But I think an important component of the GVC nodes, as I mentioned previously, is, the geopolitical alignment. And India's sort of neutral stance actually places it very well in terms of being a strategic ally of countries in strategic sectors. So I think that's the first part of the pillar. Second, we are in a world where everyone is looking for growth opportunity, and the advantage for India in terms of what it has to offer is basically, I think there's tremendous growth opportunity across many segments. It remains a very large domestic consumer market. There's significant amount of infrastructure investment that is actually needed, across sectors. So in the renewable, on the power side, port shipping is a big focus right now. Defense is a major focus right now. Roads, railways, that continues to be a big focus. So offering this, growth opportunity, which is what the world is looking for, I think is the sort of second part of the pillar. And the third part of the India strategy, I think, is really building resilience. Someone many decades back termed, a VUCA, a VUCA world, characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that's the world we are living in right now. And it becomes very important for countries to build resilience across multiple layers of not just the supply chain or critical mineral or defense, but as we are seeing, live right now in terms of even things like balance of payment on the external sector resilience. So I think these are sort of the three important pillars of the India strategy in the VUCA world that we are living in right now.
Just to add to what Sonal said, there are 3 points in terms of how we can cooperate with other countries in India and how our partner countries can cooperate with us. One, yes, the FTAs or the trade agreements we've signed recently are certainly a quest to find new export markets. I'm not denying that. But frankly, that is not the only thing. If you look at the EU deal and the proposed and very ambitious US deal, it's also a willingness to import especially components and commodities to enable manufacture in India. Again, countries as far apart as Indonesia, Australia, certain North African countries, even Russia, are very important to India because they are a source of commodities for our ever-hungry market, including to enable manufacturing. And when I mean Russia, I don't just mean energy or crude oil. It's beyond that. It's including certain types of coal for our steel plants, for instance. Okay. Second, it's a truism to suggest that don't treat India as a market, treat India as a partner. No, what does that mean? It's a nice line, but what does it actually mean? Companies which are successful in India are looking at India not just as a market, but also as a conduit to other regional markets. I'll give you 2 examples, Hyundai and Toyota, both of which make small cars in India. They don't make large cars because large cars don't sell in India. They make small cars in India, but cars they make in India are now being sold through India's connectivity with the Gulf countries and through India's trade agreements to the Gulf countries, to Africa, using the ports of the Middle East before this war at least, the ports of West Asia, and still further to Eastern Europe. Not Western Europe, but Eastern Europe. So this has expanded competitiveness and markets for small cars made by East Asian car manufacturers, which would otherwise not have been possible if those cars had been made at home. Okay? The third point I'd like to make is we are living in a world of industrial policy, but industrial policy is a race to the bottom. Every government is signing taxpayer checks, taxpayer-backed checks, till like there's no tomorrow. Cooperation is possible in coordinating and harmonizing industrial policy across limited countries, plurilateral blocks, or like-minded countries, especially in areas such as critical minerals. Everybody cannot be pulling out minerals from the ground as well as be setting up refining capacities. Because frankly, we'll all have critical minerals at the end of the day, but we'll have no economy, we'll be bankrupt. So countries such as India and Australia, Canada, perhaps Singapore comes in there as well. Like-minded countries, middle power countries perhaps, can come together for this. Some of that conversation is already happening.
I want to come back to the question of critical minerals later. I think that's something we need to discuss. But if I could switch focus back to Singapore to provide the perspective from here. Singapore has always prided itself in being an open capital trade and investment friendly country. So how is Singapore adapting to this fragmenting economic order that India is also trying to negotiate? And one in which openness for Singapore also brings the issue of interdependence, but also the vulnerability and strategic risks that come with that. So Prof. Tan, would you like to share some?
So first let me make a broad point, and this is in response to the observations raised by my co-panelists, and then I'll come more specifically to Singapore. And I think there was an approach that may have seemed all right for a moment historically. And the peak of globalization, multilateralism was working, trade was happening across the world, and everybody was getting sort of enthused by this approach of creating FTAs and signing all sorts of broad agreements. And I fully agree that, you know, whatever is done on a sort of a global stage, it always has a repercussion in the domestic side, because, you know, delivering the kinds of agreements and not creating backlash from local populace that elects a government has always become a delicate balancing act. So I think this is one of those issues that we need to be mindful of. And when the situation changes to a more fragmented world, to a more protectionist, inward-looking world, I think those things become more stark. And I think that's the cause of the kinds of stalemates that we have seen in some sort of global agreements being renegotiated, being rethought. And even in Singapore, when the CECA was signed in 2005, everybody thought it was a brilliant idea, it was great, it was a kind of a game changer, but there are also sort of reactions in the domestic scene in Singapore on what the CECA does for local companies, local employees. So these are issues that we have to face. So that moment has shifted into a more fragmented world. And I think this is where this sort of broad-based kind of all-encompassing agreements will probably need a rethink. And here it's not just about markets and benefits and competitiveness, but it's about bringing developing trust and also creating opportunities for shared interest. So my point then, leading from that, would be, and this could be applied to Singapore, India, is to perhaps think less in terms of comprehensive agreements, but to take a more modular approach. A more modular approach. You do a deep dive into certain areas where we find that there are strong complementarities, little basis for creating domestic backlash, potential for developing long-term capacities for long-term good, and then you develop that kind of sectorial depth and institutional strength, which then can be broadened and scoped out later on to include other areas. So maybe that's one way of thinking about it. Instead of a CECA or an FTA or whatever, ITIGA, whatever you call it, you do a kind of a deep dive into certain areas. And this could be the way out for the ITIGA stalemate, because then different countries with different strengths that would complement India's, and India's interests could find ways around, rather than a kind of areas where there would be a conflict of interest. So in Singapore, I think these areas have already been identified, and perhaps there could be more areas, right? So we've talked about digital finance, trade, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, maritime, green fuels, connectivity, defense and strategic alignment. These are areas which I think would benefit both sides and would avoid some of the kinds of domestic pressures that might build if it doesn't concern people making pots and pans and that sort of thing. So I think these are areas that we might want to think of. I think what works for Singapore and India is not just a kind of a mutual interest or a functional, transactional relationship. I think we both share shared values in terms of wanting a rules-based, open economy that allows, I guess, countries to trade, exchange ideas, and then to develop those ties without worrying that it's a zero-sum game. And I think that basis would probably be an important foundation on which to build long-term relationship, but based on very specific modular projects that we can develop collectively or together in the long term. And I think that's going to be important. And then as a university professor, I would have to add that actually building people-to-people ties are going to be critical, because you need deep understanding, you need collaboration, you need people to understand each other's ways of working, ways of living. And I think it should not just be a kind of a gesture made at government G2G level or even B2B, but I think we have to thicken those layers of relationship. And that's where I think talent development, skills development, people-to-people exchange are going to be quite critical in thickening the relationship.
Would you like to add to that, actually, because you've mentioned skills? I'm wondering if skill cooperation between India and Singapore is something you could speak on.
No, you look at the demographic depth of India, it's a young population, there is a lot of need, hunger for education. Singapore has the opposite problem. We have a shrinking sort of local population. But in terms of the development of skills, in terms of thinking about future development of skills future, higher education, technical education, I think Singapore has done quite well for itself. Now, there could be complementarities between India and Singapore in these areas where we can partner with like-minded institutions to actually develop those capacities. And skills is going to be quite critical in any of these areas that you talk about, right? From green technology to fintech to even defense and maritime capacity, you need skills. So I think developing the human capital, the human capacity is going to be critical. And I think this is one of those modular points where I think Singapore and India can work very closely to the mutual benefit of both sides.
I'd like to transition now to talk about energy. Energy security, energy supply, but also geopolitics of energy and critical minerals. So let me start with you first. I'm sure the audience will be very keen later, and I'm sure the questions will come up about how India is impacted by the current crisis, and I know you've spoken about this before as well. But more so, right, how does India plan to achieve energy security? This is because it's not something just started with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, right? If you look at the budget as well, there was a focus on energy security. So would you like to share your thoughts about India's vision of achieving energy security? But also, if I could ask you to also share your thoughts about how India and Singapore can both negotiate this issue, and are there potential zones for cooperation and collaboration there?
No, absolutely. And crucial policy question as we speak right now. So there are sort of multiple, strategy pillars from India's perspective in terms of energy security. I think the underlying force across all parameters is diversification. Number one is the focus on diversification of the energy mix itself. I think India has invested quite substantially on the renewable front, but clearly the focus on moving even more towards the non-fossil fuel share of energy mix is a big focus. And there are huge plans in terms of renewable investments over the next 5-10 years in terms of additional capacity and investment that is planned. In addition to that, I think the importance of nuclear energy in the energy mix has become quite clear. Even before the Middle East conflict, late last year, India did did announce a law in terms of allowing private sector in nuclear energy. There was a clause with respect to limited liability of private sector in case of an accident, which was a big hindrance for the private sector to actually participate in nuclear. So big focus on small modular reactors. So essentially the non-fossil fuel side is a push. The EV penetration in India is still quite low. So on the passenger vehicle side, EV penetration is less than 5%. So there's a big focus and a policy push in terms of increasing the EV penetration. So that's one. Two is diversifying your sources of energy supply. The Hormuz closure has made that vulnerability extremely clear. So we have, in the last 2-3 months itself, seen diversification in terms of sourcing energy from new partners in South America, in West Africa. India is also looking at more energy from US, so that's going to be important. I think another issue to look at from a more medium-term perspective is whether you need new transit routes, new maritime routes, new pipelines that need to be built in order to reduce your vulnerability to any specific maritime choke point. I think third is essentially building buffers slash strategic reserves. So in terms of reserves on oil, petroleum products, on things like LPG, in hindsight, India should have had more reserves. So that's basically sort of an important focus going forward in terms of building the total reserve capacity across different oil and petroleum products. Fourth, I think, is exploration. There are proven and provable reserves of oil and gas in India that requires a lot of investment in exploration activities. It will require a lot of investments going forward, but it needs to be part of your strategy on energy security. And finally, I guess international cooperation, is an important pillar as well. Now, I do think there are areas of cooperation for India and Singapore. So in this huge investment that are lined up on the fossil fuel side of energy, on renewables in particular, but I think over time nuclear is going to become very important. The investments required run into hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's where Singapore has an inherent strength and can partner with India to fund some of these growth opportunities to make it more of a win-win partnership. Singapore excels in innovation and technology. So combining Singapore's innovation, let's say on green tech, with India's manufacturing and cost can actually become a fairly solid product actually that could be potentially sold globally. And I think we need to also think about joint strategic reserves, not just a country level petroleum reserves, but whether we could have like an India-Singapore or India-ASEAN strategic reserve that can be deployed during times of energy, any kind of exigency. So I think, those are potential cooperation areas as well.
Very interesting, very interesting. Ashok, on a related note, as you alluded to in your previous comments, the green transition will require access to critical minerals. India will need critical minerals in downstream production, but also upstream production, depending on which is it a solar panel or is it a nuclear facility, civilian nuclear facility, I should say. And herein lies the problem of geopolitics again. Herein lies the problem of geopolitics again. Will clean energy supply chains become the next zone of geopolitical competition, and how should India position itself?
I think energy supply chains, especially green energy supply chains, are already a zone of global geopolitical competition. But to borrow a word that Sonal used, the only option is diversification, and both geographical and in terms of energy sources. As the Minister said this morning, you need a portfolio approach which incorporates everything from, frankly, fossil fuels to nuclear. Let me give you some examples. We are a very big consumer of LNG, which we use for everything from industrial use to our kitchens at home, my kitchen at home, for instance. We import a lot of LNG, traditionally have from Qatar and the UAE, and also other markets. In the past few months since the war began in the Persian Gulf, we've diversified to new suppliers, the US, Oman, Nigeria. All of these have emerged as suppliers, but we are still importing below what we need, to be honest. Month on month, it's still below what it was a year ago. However, I do feel that as part of their rebuilding and resilience after this war, countries such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia will build new networks, new pipelines, new nodes and avenues of energy distribution to bypass the Strait of Hormuz trap. That is already happening, and it might actually end up emerging faster than we imagine. So that is something we're certainly looking at. Second, India, just like Singapore has some of the world's best petroleum refineries, India also has a significant refining capacity, which has given it leverage in the international energy market. And it is going to double down on that by building at least 2 new refineries, one on our east coast, one on our west coast, which will make us much more interlinked to global energy flows. So we import crude, refine it, export it out. It simply gives us more leverage, and that's going to be an important part. Solar. We have a very impressive solar story, but the degree of solar hardware we end up importing from China is still significant. There is some manufacture in India, and there even exports from India in certain subcategories, but it's got some way to go, and frankly, whatever manufacture we did achieve came on the back of a project financed and supported by the Development Finance Corporation of the US under the Biden administration. I don't think such generous finance is going to be available soon. It's a reality. Nuclear is certainly a silver bullet option everyone is hoping for. We have our own domestic SMR program. We also are cooperating with certain companies, including a company in the US, which is run by an Indian, which we at the Asia Group have been working with them, bringing them to talks with the government of India. India, you need to realize, already has some nuclear manufacturing capacity. The Tatas, for instance, L&T, are part of the nuclear value chain globally. So the idea of SMRs, which can replace a smaller coal-based power plants, is a very attractive one. Of course, it hasn't really happened yet. But it's one of those technologies that we are at the cusp of, and that really could be the game changer. Finally, there is technological innovation. One of the companies we at the Asia Group work with is developing not lithium-ion, but aluminium-ion batteries. Okay? And they are not as efficient as lithium-ion. It's about 70% as efficient. Okay? But that's still something. And availability of aluminium in India is that much greater. The supply chain is narrower and shorter. The dependency on other countries is narrower and shorter. So, in the end, technology will give you an answer.
When you mentioned aluminium, it spurred me to think about the discourse on the circular economy in India as well. There's a lot of talk, there's a mission as well for that. Is there potential for that growth in India? Would anybody like to take that?
Look, absolutely. I'll give you one aspect which struck me most recently. It's recycling electronic waste, for instance, and refining it to extract everything from gold and silver to not gold, silver, sorry, to critical minerals. Countries in this part of the world, including Singapore, have enormous knowledge and know-how and have invested in this. It's certainly an area of cooperation between India, because the sheer volume of e-waste we generate, I'm just giving you that as an example, is enormous. And is it exploited in the manner it can be? Frankly, no.
I'm mindful of the time, and I want to open the floor for questions. But before doing that, right, I want to come back to the forum itself. And as I mentioned earlier this morning, one of the reasons we set up this forum, or we conceived of it, was that we wanted it to be a base of generating new ideas for new zones of cooperation. And I'd like you now to look ahead. I'd invite each of you to share your thoughts on, in your view, what should be the next phase of the India-Singapore cooperation? Are there specific sectors that you are most excited about as we chart this next decade of partnership? So, Prof. Tan, shall I start with you?
Okay, so I'm reading my notes because last night I was thinking about how to answer some of these difficult questions that Iqbal was likely to pose to me. And I thought, one way of thinking about it would be to see what are the priorities from the India perspective, from the Singapore perspective for the next 5 years, and then ask myself, what would success look like if we did well in these areas? So I guess from Singapore's perspective, I think we would like to preserve, and this is because we are a small trading nation, a rules-based multilateralism. I think that's going to be critical for Singapore's continued sort of success, while maintaining flexible minilateral coalitions. In other words, working with specific partners, either in groups or as individuals bilaterally, to see how we can develop, say, modular kind of initiatives, and then to basically convert India cooperation into operational corridors instead of just sort of bilateral trade in this and that, that encompasses digital trade, green shipping, food, semiconductors. So corridors. And we heard this morning the mention of the Green Shipping Corridor initiative, right? And then basically to build the public support by linking this sort of opportunities to jobs in SMEs, and in skills and in resilience. So I think that's the Singapore's perspective. I think this is one area that we need to pay attention to. And from India's perspective, I hope that India can see Singapore as a base to accelerate integration with ASEAN and look at possibilities in capital, logistics, digital norms. And I think the process of CECA, Attica is being rethought. And I think, again, how to create the right opportunities where the benefits would be evident on both sides. And here, supply chain in semiconductors, green fuels, pharmaceuticals, food exports, while deepening maritime defense cooperation. I think these are all critical areas. If these things go well, I guess we hope that Singapore will be seen as a trusted standards broker and crisis resilience hub, with India as a credible growth and resilience pillar, rather than just a symbolic relationship. That means there's some substance to this relationship that contributes to the resilience of our respective countries. And then India hopefully will become easier for Singapore and ASEAN firms to use as a production services and innovation base, while Singapore is the trusted launchpad into Southeast Asia. And for all the visits, for all the goodwill, for all the warm relationship that we heard this morning being articulated by the High Commissioner and by the Minister, we hope that these episodic summits and meetings or institutional routines will eventually see outcomes that are measurable, where there's industry intake, and basically you create the interoperability kind of a capacity for both India and Singapore in those areas that we spoke about. So I think those would be the priority areas. And 5 years, who knows, will change, things will change again, and it's very hard to now look at the crystal ball and imagine what will happen in 2035. But if we can achieve those things, and I think the basis for those kinds of relations are already there, I think we just need to build on them and be very tactical, strategic as well as tactical, and a kind of a portfolio strategy that you mentioned could be a way of identifying areas where I think both sides will benefit.
Very little to add to what Tan has just said. He's covered the gamut. I'll say that both of us are wise and mature countries with wise and mature leaderships, and we will both be around on January 21st, 2029. And we will build the world after that. In essence, we need to be part of each other's resilience and diversification. If you mentioned pharmaceuticals, that's APIs especially is part of the resilience story for both our countries. If you look at defense manufacture in India, semiconductors for which we cannot make a mark in the semiconductor ecosystem without support from friends like Singapore or Malaysia, for instance, in ASEAN. And if you look at electronics manufacture in India, not just the end product, but increasingly the electronics component manufacturing scheme, which for capacitors, for PCBs, which has started in India, which also gives ASEAN countries more options. And they would welcome it too. provided, of course, the price point is acceptable. This again, Singapore, ASEAN more generally, Singapore more specifically, are crucial to this. Finally, I'd say connectivity, both air connectivity and maritime connectivity, and digital connectivity, subsea cables, for instance, for which we need more capacity, we need more resilience, we need diversification from current sources, with some of which are vulnerable. And lastly, a low-hanging fruit, cybersecurity. That is something which like-minded countries, not just limited to India and Singapore, need to come together to work towards, what is that clause in NATO, Article 5, which is that, mutual defense. I think some of us need a similar mutual defense back, not as part of NATO, but as part of our own arrangement as trusted Asian countries, to protect and defend each other's critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with everyone, and I think there's tremendous potential in the India-Singapore partnership in the coming years. My proposal is, can we replicate the Johor-Singapore SEZ model for Singapore with, some of the states specifically in India? You have land, you have access to whatever is needed, you have space, and India is focused a lot on AI and data center investments going forward, and I think a partnership with Singapore, will be a tremendous positive for both countries. So I think we should look at potentially replicating the JSSEZ model with some of the states that are keen in India to actually partner with Singapore, and I think there are quite a few of them. Both countries are looking to build resilience, and the resilience on energy security requires building in more storage capacity on oil and gas. India offers the land and the space that Singapore needs. So this can potentially be an area of collaboration between the two countries. There's also focus on building strategic reserves of critical mineral. That's an area the two countries can partner in. And third, I think infrastructure. Marrying Singapore's excellence with India's needs. India needs tremendous amount of urban, renovation, development, city, which is something that India can learn a lot from, from Singapore. Singapore's expertise in port design, operation, in airport MROs is something that India can learn a lot from. So I think infrastructure has to be an important third source of partnership as we look forward.
Excellent. I'm delighted that we ended on an optimistic note as well. It's sometimes hard to be optimistic in the way things are shaping in the world. But on that note, I'd like to open up for questions to the floor. There will be a roving mic that's going around. So the floor is open. If there are any hands, yes.
Thank you. My question is to Professor Yong. I think I'll implore you to put on your historian's hat again and perhaps try to remind the room. So my question is, I've heard the word complementarities a lot of times since morning, and I think Minister Yan reminded us of the International Solar Alliance. There's been cooperation with Andhra Pradesh. So I want to know, from Singapore's perspective, has diplomacy with India worked better, or has para-diplomacy? Like
Diplomacy of India
or para-diplomacy, like or para-diplomacy, which is, do you work better with states or individual states in India, like Andhra Pradesh, or at the national level?
Shall I take that question, or you want to?
Please go ahead first, then we'll wait for more hands.
Okay. When we first started 20, 30 years ago to try to understand India, I think the approach was to look at India is one country, but India is a subcontinental country, and 28, 29 states, it's very complex, and there are lots of differences across India. So I think over the years we've evolved, Singapore has evolved its approach and tried to understand at two levels. One, of course, all India, and two, at the states level. So there has been attention paid to different states and see what are the distinctiveness, what are the opportunities, what are complementarities, areas where we can collaborate that are unique, I guess, to that state. So I think the Singapore government, I'm not from the government, so I don't speak on behalf of the government, but it's what we read. I mean, they have identified areas where there are best chances for success. So for instance, it was Gujarat, it was Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and etc., etc. So I think it is a dual approach, or a joint approach in trying to see how best to develop that kind of understanding and that relationship through diplomacy between India and Singapore. And that has been a sustained effort. I think you will see, for instance, I was just told by the minister that last week the Andhra cabinet or ministers had visited Singapore. They had a very tight visit here, several days. There was a lot of mutual learning, and they'll go back, and then senior civil servants will come. And I think this is quite typical of states where Singapore has deep engagements. Sometimes it has led to disappointment, the earlier stories about Amaravati, but I think it's a long game, and I think the diplomacy is sustained so that we say that, well, if there are setbacks, let's put it aside and let's try to see whether there are new opportunities. And India is huge, and it's subcontinental size, as I said, and it has the geographical strategic importance for Singapore. So I think that will continue. So the answer to your question simply is, actually we've engaged at all levels,
Thank you. Thank you so much for your profound insight and wisdom. My name is Patrick Lai, and I just have a general question. What matter most in leadership in, volatile markets and also geopolitical uncertainty? What matter most in leadership?
Broadly.
Yeah. Open-ended question.
What is most important in leadership in this difficult world that we're living in?
So it's a question for all three speakers? Okay.
Could I attempt it? I'll give you a story. President George W. Bush was president many years ago. Somebody we in India remember very fondly because he was part of the nuclear deal that, in a sense, brought India into the international nuclear regime. He hasn't spoken much or traveled much since he stopped being president. He came to, just after he left the White House, he went to Korea for a conference, South Korea, then he came to India. He was asked the same question there. I was in the audience, he was asked the question, what is the one tip for leadership? He said, when I became president, every week my staff would bring me that week's ratings, the Gallup poll or whatever, that you are up 2%, down 5%. And he said for the first few weeks, it drove me crazy. Because we were then doing things in the next 5 days to fix next week's poll. Finally, after 1 month, I said, stop bringing me these polls. I'm going to do what I think is right. In 4 years, let voters judge me. And in 10 years, let history judge me. I don't want to look at these polls. It is the courage to break away from these weekly polls, or today, in today's world, from the every moment nonsense of a social media trend, and to take a long-term view. That is leadership.
Yeah, it's another way, I guess, of saying that leadership vision is very important, commitment and principles are very important, because you must, in a way, understand what is important and also not do things for short-term personal gains. And I think that long-term vision and not being worried about the noise around and trying to do the right thing is important. And I think for the troubled world that we are now in, I think that is, in my view, the most important. That means cut through the noise, understand what's truly important, stay the course, and then bring people along with you.
Right? Mr. Abidin.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope I beg to indulgence in case I get off tangent a bit, because I like to ask a question which is not very focused on the topic itself, but related. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you for the sharing, because we learned a lot today about India and the potential that holds. But then my question is related to, in terms of the better understanding of India. Is there one area where, in fact, India is misunderstood or not properly understood? And that's about the inter-religious relations and aspects of India. I'm one of those who grew up and see India as a model for multiculturalism, inter-religious harmony. But what's happening lately, in fact, raised a lot of questions. And I wonder whether, in fact, this is better understood, or does India deserve better understanding of that, whether it affects relations, for example, between India and the Muslim world, the potential that holds as far as Middle East is concerned, Malaysia is concerned, Indonesia is concerned, and what these countries, these regions can work better with India in terms of achieving the potential it has in terms of what you shared with us. Thank you.
Sure, I think that question is...
Sir, you've asked a good question, but you've answered it yourself. So, we are living in a turbulent world where, social cleavages do get, especially in times of economic stress, social cleavages all over the world do becomes sort of sometimes more obvious than they should be, and in this hyperactive world of social media and news television, they are sometimes blown out of proportion. I'm not suggesting India doesn't have problems of the nature of you're describing, of social tensions or sometimes community tensions. It does. But broadly, are those problems manageable, and have they been contained in a largely diverse country that in its own way offers equal opportunity for all its citizens? Now, the opportunities can be expanded, I'm not denying that. They can be made better for everybody. But broadly speaking, that diversity and that access to opportunity, whatever opportunity is there for all. You can see that across towns and villages and cities and bustling cities of India. Our relationship with countries that happen to be Muslim countries, especially countries of in West Asia and the Arab world, is ancient. These are amongst our most ancient relationships. If you go back into our history, the likely first international trade the Indus Valley civilization did was with Sumer, or what is in today Iraq, Mesopotamia. So that relationship is ancient. It has it can never be deprioritized. In fact, in some senses, Singapore and ASEAN to our east and Dubai and West Asia to our west are natural expanded geographies and part of our broader economic ecosystem. So yes, sometimes you do see the noise in the media and or social media which suggests otherwise, but broadly I do think India's diversity shines through and pulls through.
I see a hand at the back there as well.
This is also building on your remarks as well as the previous comment by the gentleman. There's a lot that is happening which is positive in India. Of course, there are certain negative things that happen everywhere else. The Straits Times and the mainstream media. Just a question, because this is the window to India for most Singapore residents. So can more be done by the Straits Times to present a more balanced view about India? And it's not just the Straits Times, but mainstream media, because that is the window to India for most Singaporeans.
I think I'm going to pass that question to Prof. Tan, actually.
So let me start with a story as well. All those years ago when we first started ISES, and there was, to be honest, not a lot of interest in India at that time, Before 1991, I think, yes, there were civilizational links and that sort of thing, but India was not seen as a economic destination, a tourist destination. 1991 onwards, things started to change. There was more interest, and that's why places ISES was set up. At that time, I'll admit, I think the point that you've made was probably correct. That actually there was little media interest, and nobody read about India, and you heard stories, but there was no coverage. But I must admit, and in fairness to my press colleagues who are here today, that since then, I think the coverage from Straits Times on India, South Asian affairs have grown quite significantly. Perhaps more could be done. So the coverage of economic relations, of elections in India, all this, I think we have received quite a lot of coverage. And it's not just the print media, but the broadcast media as well. And what we try to do at ISES is to try to keep that volume high, by ensuring that there are always things to talk about. Actually, what is more important in my view is not the media, or now the mainstream media, as it were, as you call it, but social media and people to people. When I talk to my students and I ask them, do you all read the broadsheets? And many of them will sheepishly say no. Because they regard broadsheets as government propaganda, So they would get their news from social media. And I think social media stories, double-edged sword, right? It's popular, it's fast, TikTok and all, but it's unfiltered. So I think that's where, how do you regulate that space? I'm not sure. But personal stories, in my view, are more important. People who have gone to India, seen India, experienced India, coming back, and sharing their stories are very important. And I think this is where at institutes of learning, at the polys, universities, elsewhere, we need to create more opportunity for our young people in Singapore to be able to spend time in India and experiencing India. And this is something we've tried to do, but I must admit that because of distracted competitions from other places which seem more attractive. Like if I were to ask a student, would you prefer to go to India or Paris or Shanghai? I think the answer is pretty obvious. But those students who understand potentials, who see longer views, will see that actually India is actually going to be a very important place for Singapore to understand, and we need to do more of that. So at the universities, we have created opportunities, not always easy. We need to scale it up. We need to create more opportunities. And I think that would be a better way of getting people, or getting India into people's sort of mind shares, The press, of course, could play its part. And I think institutes like ISES must also do its part. So I think these are all, as I said, multiple approaches for us to create awareness, deeper awareness. Some work still to be done, I'll admit, but I think we've made progress from, say, maybe a decade ago. But perhaps we got to think of more creative ways of introducing or interesting India to our local population here.
Actually, if I could just add a quick 2 points to that. One is that at ISES, one of the things that we've been doing for, I think this is the third year, is we bring Singapore students from universities in Singapore to India and we call it the India Experience. And we expose them to various parts of India. They meet people there from various sectors. And that's been a good way. The feedback from that for students has been good. And we've been, if I can be very candid about it, when we first came up with the idea, we were a little concerned that all the students applying would be essentially Singaporean Indians who already have a knowledge or some sort of exposure to India and some sort of comfort zone. We were very pleasantly surprised that the ratio has been mostly Chinese and Malays and other communities. So that's been a good sign for us. We gauge on sort of like people are willing to go there, people are willing to spend time there, etc. So that's been a sort of a small sort of anecdotal thing. The other thing is that we've actually launched a master's program on South Asia. So it's called the Geopolitics of South Asia in the US. And again, although it's South Asia, we have to be very honest, much of it will cover India. And we were a little concerned that, how much of uptake would there be? I'm very happy to say that the applications have been robust. They exceeded what we expected. And now we are kicking ourselves, thinking we should open more spaces for the course. So there are other channels of engagement and exposure.
Not just from India, right?
Yeah, precisely. The students are from everywhere. Yeah. So, sorry. I know I said I won't speak, but I just thought I'd come in. The floor is still open. Any other hands? Yes, Rosa.
I'd first like to thank the panel for excellent insights this morning. I learned a lot. I guess my question is addressed to Mr. Ashok and Ms. Somal. The business and elites, the intellectual community, and the people who are influential in India towards cooperation and work with Singapore, what can you share about how they perceive us? The positives, I think, have come through in a lot of the remarks this morning in terms of how both countries can work together. I suppose those are the positives. But I wonder whether you could be honest to share some of the hard truths about the more negative perceptions that perhaps are prevailing there, because that then helps us to also address those important, possibly gaps to further cooperation. So perhaps some hard truths about how we are perceived among the people who matter in India would be very helpful to us. Thank you.
I'm being very honest, it is all positive. And no, I think the beauty of Singapore is it's always open to feedback and criticism. And that is what has enabled Singapore to actually advance over the last few decades. So I do think genuinely that India looks to Singapore as, the question to your question of, what is leadership? I think Singapore embodies that leadership as a country which is thinking long-term, building, sustainable relationships, very focused on, being competitive, being innovative, and that is exactly actually how Singapore is perceived in my view.
Very little to add to what Sonal said. Singapore is much admired by people who matter in India, whether in the business community or in government. The systems and models you set up, admittedly, it's for a much smaller geography and society than the complexity of India, but are greatly admired. Your public service is very admired, and in fact, in many ways, a role model for the way we want to modernize our public service. Your infrastructure, urbanization models are all well appreciated. There is a great desire to learn from you, especially in terms of infrastructure and urbanization and connectivity. This is the first port of call, I would say, for any Indian business looking eastwards or even frankly looking westwards and seeking to set up an international office or in the case of industrialists, a family office. The number of Indian family office or international headquarters located in Singapore is, the number is well known, it's a significant number. I don't think any other city even compares. Singapore has always been inviting and hospitable as an open city and open to people from all over the world, to businesses from all over the world. It has drawn a lot of Indian talent. There is cautious hope in India that that continues, because we are living in a world where work visas sometimes become a problem, and we will certainly hope that continues. And finally, I'd say, we offer Singapore, especially when talking to potential investors from other countries, we offer Singapore as an example of a country or of an investor community that has come into India without asking for, every possible problem to be solved before we even step in. They come in and say, we'll work with you to make things work because there is opportunity here. As someone put it to me once, the Indian way of doing business is an arranged marriage. You first get married, then you work it out. It's not that you find me the perfect partner, the ultimate prenup, which is foolproof, and only then will I think of investing. Some countries do that, Singaporeans don't. Thank you.
Yeah. I see two more hands, and I'm mindful of the time, so if it's okay for the speakers, can I take both questions together? Yeah. So here first, and then there.
Thank you for a very insightful discussion. This refers to Sonal suggesting that one area of cooperation could be in infrastructure, like help India with airports, etc. My question is to Professor. In Singapore, HDB has been a huge success story. It is uniquely Singapore, right? I mean, you can't find that anywhere else. Has there ever been like a recommendation from the Singapore government to develop any particular township in India in the HDB model? Or has there ever been an outreach from India, from any town, saying that can we replicate an HDB township in, say, Pondicherry or Tirunelveli or something like that? Just curious.
I will just expand on the question that you asked in terms of how Singapore is viewed in India, and I was born in India, so I know exactly how it's viewed, and that's why I came to study here. But what I want to ask is, are there things that Singapore could learn from India? And I'm sure all of you would have some thoughts about this. So if you could get 3 from the panel, it would be great. Thank you so much.
There was another hand that actually came up earlier, so if you don't mind, I'll just take the last question as well.
Thank you for counting me in as well. We heard about sectoral partnerships. I represent the non-profit sector, the civil society from India, and I was thinking that as we are talking about unilateral arrangements in the changing global scenario, I was looking at the more disciplined regime around FCRA in India, and since Singapore is also a hub for a lot of family offices and a lot of philanthropic offices, do we see scope to do more in that realm in terms of building direct connections between India, Indian civil society, and funders from Singapore? Has there any discourse been happening around that, and is there scope to work more on that? Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question? We couldn't hear it clearly.
A lot of philanthropic money, family offices sit in Singapore, and a lot of work needs to be done in India. Can there be scope to build unilateral relationships around that? Okay.
Family offices, can there be a point of engagement within Singapore, philanthropic families? So, So Sonu, can I start with you? And then maybe there was a question about what Singapore can learn.
I can actually try and answer your question. So I think, India finds a solution amidst the chaos. And I think that's what Singapore could learn from India is sometimes, you have to find a way through always. So I think managing, finding a solution through the chaos that is there, sometimes you have to think really outside the box. And I think because of the difficulties in doing business in India, people usually find a way out. And I think that's sort of the approach that I think is unique to India.
Jugaad.
Yeah, I didn't want to use jugaad for the audience, but yeah, jugaad is the...
In terms of what Singapore can learn from India, actually, I think both countries can learn from each other. At the simplest level, both of these countries are very level-headed and mature countries that believe in the importance of maintaining multiple relationships. One of the reasons India, despite the challenges of the past 5 years or 6 years from 2020 when the pandemic hit us, one of the reasons India has frankly stayed on a steady economic course, its macroeconomic fundamentals have not really been affected. It has continued to grow, maybe not as much as it could have grown if the world had been in good shape, but still reasonable growth, 7%, sometimes 8%. One of the reasons we managed to do that is because we've found our way, not just domestically, but also globally, with multiple partnerships. If you can't import fertilizers from China, you import them from Saudi Arabia and Morocco. You find partnerships. Every engagement matters. Singapore believes in this as well. If India and Singapore work more closely, we will benefit each other by just taking our individual relationships much wider for a common good. And here we can be a model, frankly, for South Asia and Southeast Asia as a collective region, because both of us punch well above our weight.
I think my co-panelists have answered the question, to which I'll just add that there's always things that Singapore can learn from our friends and our partners, India included, of course. And the scale is just so different between our two countries, right? But just understanding how governance of a huge, complex country and sub-state level, I think is something that Singapore can understand how to deal with that complexity. Now, I'll just come quickly to the HDB question. You use the word unique, and herein lies the problem. It is a uniquely Singapore phenomenon. I don't think this sort of model is replicable anywhere else in the world for two reasons. One, it has to be driven by the state and a very determined government, because everything from land acquisition to using your savings to pay for your flat, to even ethnic policies of how to distribute, all these comes from a very clear set of rules which works for Singapore. I'm not sure it is enforceable or a good idea to replicate this model. Building the infrastructure, yes, but it's actually a holistic kind of a phenomenon. It's about giving stakeholdership, a roof above your head, community integration, ethnic integration. So I think it's a whole package, and I think it's not easily replicable. I think Singapore has tried to build not housing estates, but science parks and all this. Varying degrees of success, but I think those are examples where infrastructure, I guess, could be replicated. But the Housing Development Board is an experiment which I think can only happen in Singapore, and it evolved over several decades. And it has to be, in a way, a political act that sees to its success. And I'm not sure whether this can be done anywhere else. Maybe with not the way that Singapore does it, but different versions. So that's my answer to you. On the family offices, I think, I think we should, because now there are family offices that are being established in Singapore. They have tremendous resources. I think they have to try to find opportunities to engage Singapore society. So I am in a business, in a university, of engaging some of this and asking these family officers if they are prepared to do philanthropy to support higher education, to support needy students, and so on and so forth. So herein is an opportunity, and we hope that we will be able to create those kinds of synergies. I'll admit that family officers, at the end of the day, are not just philanthropic agencies, they are also businesses. So we always have to find win-win situations. that benefits both sides.
I think all three speakers have given us a lot to chew on over lunch, and I'm sure the conversations will carry on outside of the room. All that remains with me is to invite you all to please join me in thanking all three speakers.